The air felt thick, as if it was closing in on her. Hannah stood in the middle of her living room, eyes wide, heart pounding. The house was quiet, too quiet. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls, stretching unnaturally. She swallowed hard, her breath shallow, trying to shake the unease creeping into her bones. Something was wrong. She had always been alone in the house, but tonight felt different. Every little sound felt amplified, every movement in the corner of her vision more intense. The whisper she thought she heard was faint at first, so faint she doubted herself, but now it was unmistakable. Hannah. The name lingered in the dark. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't anyone's voice she recognized. Her pulse quickened. She turned sharply, trying to find the source of the whisper, but the room was empty. Nothing but shadows. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Hannah stood still, her heart racing. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to stretch toward her. She took a cautious step forward, almost not believing her own senses. Was it just the wind? The house creaked, as if responding to her thoughts. The quiet was too much, too heavy. She grabbed her phone again, only to find it dead. Panic began to crawl beneath her skin. She had to get out of there. Just when she thought she could escape, the whisper came again, louder this time, closer. It wasn't a figment of her imagination. It was real. Hannah. The voice came from the dark, pulling her in. With a breath of fear, she turned to face the corner, where the darkness seemed to move. The darkness seemed alive, watching her. As she stared into the empty space, she felt a pressure on her chest. Her breath quickened, her pulse pounding in her ears. Something wasn't right. She had been here before. The room felt familiar, yet alien, like a dream she couldn't wake from. Every little noise around her grew louder, the wind tapping against the window, the distant hum of a car passing by. Yet nothing seemed to ease the growing terror gnawing at her. She stepped back, her skin prickling as the whisper came once more. Hannah, her name like a curse. Desperate, she tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The house had become her prison. Frustration boiled within her. Why couldn't she leave? The door wouldn't open. The windows were sealed shut, and all she could hear was her own panicked breathing. Her mind raced as she searched for an explanation. Could this be happening? She wanted to scream, but the words got caught in her throat. Another whisper echoed through the room, this time colder, almost mocking. Hannah, you cannot run. The words froze her in place. Was it the wind? The air? She wasn't sure anymore. Panic set in as she collapsed against the wall. Hannah's thoughts raced as she tried to calm herself. It had to be the stress, the exhaustion, the isolation playing tricks on her mind. Yet deep down she knew the truth. Something was wrong. Something was wrong. The whisper returned, not from the corner this time, but from behind her, cold and unnervingly close. Hannah, you are mine. The voice echoed in her mind, her body stiffening in fear. She could feel the presence now, not in her mind, but in the very air around her. Her breath caught, and she spun around. But there was nothing there. Just shadows. Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that the house was no longer hers. Every step felt like an intrusion. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, reaching for her. The whispers were constant now, louder than before, almost mocking. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, just her mind playing tricks. But the weight of it all was too much to ignore. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind made her heart race. She grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, hoping the light would push the shadows back. But when she turned it on, the beam of light trembled as if afraid to pierce the darkness. There was something there, something that had always been there. Her thoughts raced. Was she losing her mind? Or was the house alive? The fear settled into her chest as the whisper came again. Close, too close. Hannah! The whispers had become louder, almost as if they were moving closer. Hannah didn't feel alone. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The air was suffocating. She could hear her breath shallow and quick as she backed away from the corner. Her mind raced. Was this real? Was there something in the house with her? The house was old, sure, but never had it felt like this. Never had it felt so alive. The walls seemed to breathe. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the air grew colder with each passing second. She swung the flashlight in every direction, the beam cutting through the shadows like a knife. But the whispers never stopped. They seemed to wrap around her, as if the house itself was speaking to her. Hannah! The whispers were too much now. Hannah couldn't escape them. Her ears rang with the sound of her name, but every time she turned, she saw nothing. She grabbed the door handle again, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. She slammed her shoulder against it, hoping to break free, but the door held firm. She turned back to the room, her heart hammering in her chest. The shadows were no longer just in the corners. They were moving, crawling along the walls like something living. She could feel their presence, something that wasn't human, something that didn't belong here. The flashlight flickered as if it was about to die. The room felt colder. The air smelled of mildew and dust. Hannah, the voice whispered again. But this time, it was closer than ever before. Her chest tightened with fear. The walls felt like they were closing in, and she couldn't breathe. The air was thick with something she couldn't explain, and the whisper of her name was no longer just a sound. It felt like a touch, a cold, invisible hand on her skin. She turned in a circle, searching for the source, but found nothing. The flashlight's glow was fading fast. It was all too much. She needed to leave, to get out, but every direction felt wrong. Every path led her back into the darkness. The whisper didn't stop, and this time it wasn't just her name. The voice was deeper now, darker. You cannot escape. She froze, unable to move. She felt trapped. The house was alive. It was toying with her. The room was silent now, eerily still. But that silence was worse than the whispers. Hannah couldn't tell if her mind was playing tricks on her, or if she was really hearing the voice of the house. She stepped cautiously toward the window, her eyes scanning the darkness outside. The street was quiet, no cars passing by. It felt like no one was near, like she was the only one left in the world. But the voice came again, louder this time, as if it were coming from within her own head. Hannah, you belong to me. She backed away, stumbling over the rug on the floor, her eyes wild. She was trapped, and there was no way out. Hannah stood frozen, the key still clutched in her hand. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that filled the room. Every instinct told her to leave, to run away from the house. But she couldn't. The key felt alive in her hand, pulsing with some dark energy. She had to know what it opened. She had to understand what was happening to her. The shadows around her seemed to shift, as if watching her every move. The air grew thicker, and her chest tightened with fear. With a deep breath, she turned toward the old wooden door in the far corner of the room. It had always been there, but it had never seemed important, until now. The key fit into the lock with a soft click, as if the house itself were welcoming her. She hesitated, but with a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark hallway. It was colder here, the air stale with years of disuse. As Hannah stepped into the hallway, the door behind her slammed shut with a violent force. She jumped, her heart racing in her chest. She was trapped. The hallway stretched far beyond her reach, and the air smelled of dampness and decay. The flashlight flickered as she walked down the narrow path. each step echoing in the silence. She felt the walls close in around her. The deeper she walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The whispers started again, but this time they were clearer, more urgent. "Hannah, you belong here." The hallway seemed endless. The walls felt like they were closing in on her, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Hannah could feel her breath quicken, the pressure on her chest increasing. She turned to look behind her, but the door had vanished. There was no way back. Panic surged through her. She had no choice but to keep moving forward. The flashlight flickered again, casting strange shadows on the walls. In the distance, she saw a faint light, like the glow of a distant lantern. As she approached, the whispers grew louder and the temperature dropped. The air around her felt colder than ever before. She could almost hear footsteps behind her, but when she turned, there was no one there. The house was alive, and it was watching her. As she neared the glowing light, Hannah felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over her. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the walls. The light ahead flickered and she hesitated. What could be waiting for her? She moved closer, her pulse racing. The growl grew louder, more menacing, but the light in the distance continued to flicker. It was as if something was pulling her toward it. She reached the doorway, and the moment she stepped inside, everything went silent. The light was coming from an old cracked mirror that stood in the center of the room, but the reflection was wrong. It wasn't her reflection that stared back at her. Instead, the mirror showed a dark figure, obscured by shadows. Hannah felt the air grow colder, her breath visible in the frigid air. She reached out, her hand trembling as it neared the mirror. The moment her fingers brushed the cold surface, a sharp pain shot through her chest. She gasped, stepping back. The figure in the mirror moved, its eyes locking onto hers. It wasn't just a reflection, it was something real. The growl returned, louder this time, reverberating in her ears. Hannah tried to pull away, but the mirror seemed to pull her in, as if it was reaching out to claim her. Her heart raced and her breath became shallow. She had to get out. She had to escape. With a final, desperate push, she backed away from the mirror, her eyes never leaving the figure's dark gaze. She turned and ran, but the growl followed, echoing through the halls. The house had her now, and there was no escape. Hannah's body shook with fear, but her mind was clear. The house was alive, and it had been waiting for her to unlock its secrets. The shadows no longer whispered. They screamed, demanding her attention. As she stepped back from the mirror, the growl grew louder, more oppressive. It was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, filling the room and closing in on her. She turned, desperate to escape, but the hallways had shifted. What was once an open path had become a maze, a labyrinth of walls closing in on her. Her pulse thundered in her ears as the air grew thick with cold. She could feel the weight of the house bearing down on her. There was no escape. She had opened the door, and now she had to face whatever was waiting inside. The darkness was no longer something she could ignore. It was consuming her. The walls felt like they were moving, shifting with every step she took. Hannah could hear the whispers again, this time louder, more demanding. "You cannot escape." Her heart raced as she sprinted through the hallway, hoping to find a way out. But the hall seemed endless, the shadows closing in behind her. The house was no longer just a structure. It was alive, reacting to her every movement. She turned a corner, only to find another hallway stretching before her. The oppressive air pressed down on her chest, and she gasped for breath. The growl returned, louder now, vibrating through her body. She could feel it in her bones. The house wasn't just trying to trap her, it was trying to break her. Hannah collapsed against the wall, her body trembling. The growl was so close now, and she could feel the temperature drop around her. She wiped her eyes, hoping to clear the fog of fear clouding her vision, but the house wasn't letting her go. The floorboards creaked beneath her, the sound of something or someone approaching. Her breathing was shallow, her thoughts scattered. She had to do something. She had to stop running. Turning, she stumbled down another path, her flashlight barely casting any light ahead of her. The shadows were thick, almost liquid, and they seemed to follow her every move. There was no escape, no refuge. The house had become a prison, and the walls were closing in around her. A voice whispered in her ear, and Hannah spun around, her heart racing. "You can't hide from me." It was the voice from the mirror, the voice that had followed her from the moment she stepped into this house. She staggered backward, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to run, but her legs felt like lead. The shadows seemed to twist and shift around her, preventing her escape. The growl returned, deeper now, reverberating through her body. She could feel it in her bones, the presence of something ancient, something that had been waiting for. The walls moved again, this time trapping her in a small, confined space. She was cornered. There was no way out. She was trapped, and the house was going to claim her. In a final burst of panic, Hannah tried to push through the shadows, her body shaking uncontrollably. She reached for the walls, desperate to find a way out. But they were cold, unnaturally cold, and she could feel them pushing back. The growl grew louder, more forceful, as if the house itself was breathing down her neck. Her vision blurred as she stumbled through the dark, and she realized with a sickening certainty that the house was alive. It was feeding on her fear, using it to trap her in its endless corridors. With one last desperate cry, she fell to the ground, her body too exhausted to keep fighting. The house had won. There was no escape now. The house felt different now, as if it had completely taken over. Hannah's mind was unraveling, and the walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing second. The growl, that had once been an occasional sound, was now constant, a low hum vibrating through her body. Her vision was blurry, and her thoughts seemed to be disjointed, each one fighting for space in her mind. She could hear her own breath, shallow and panicked, echoing in the darkened halls. She had to escape, but the house was no longer just a place. It had become a living thing, and she was trapped inside its body. Her hands trembled as she clutched the flashlight, the light flickering with every movement. The shadows seemed to follow her, their forms distorting, growing larger as they closed in. There was no refuge left, only the suffocating darkness that seemed to press against her mind. Hannah stumbled through the hall, her thoughts fragmented and slipping away. Every step felt like a struggle, as though the house itself was trying to pull her back into the shadows. The walls seemed to bend and warp, distorting in ways that made her dizzy. She wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The house was feeding on her fear, and every time she looked over her shoulder, the growls grew louder. They were no longer just sounds. They were physical, vibrating through her bones. She had no idea where she was anymore. The hallway had become a maze. She reached for the door in front of her, but it was locked. Desperation flooded her chest as she pounded on it with her fists. The darkness was closing in, and there was no way out. The sound of her pounding fists faded into the oppressive silence. Hannah turned, unable to shake the feeling that the house was watching her. The air around her was suffocating, and the walls seemed to close in, shrinking with every breath she took. She felt dizzy, the ground beneath her feet shifting as though the house itself was alive and twisting beneath her. The growl, now a constant low hum, rattled her bones. There was no escape. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a predator, and she was its prey. The floorboards creaked underfoot as she stumbled backward, her vision blurring as the darkness surrounded her. She wanted to cry out, to scream for help, but her throat was tight, and no sound came. The house had broken her, and now it was taking everything. Suddenly the growl stopped, and for a moment there was complete silence. But it wasn't comforting. The silence was deafening, a vacuum that sucked all hope from the room. Hannah was left standing there, her chest tight, her breath shallow. The house had gone quiet, but she knew something worse was coming. The air felt thick, like the calm before a storm. Her eyes darted around the room, and the shadows seemed to shift again, growing darker and more menacing. She stumbled backward, her foot catching on something on the floor. As she looked down, she realized it was the mirror. The same mirror from the first room. But it wasn't the same. It had changed. The reflection in the glass wasn't her own. Instead, it was a twisted, dark version of herself, staring back at her with cold, empty eyes. Hannah's reflection in the mirror grinned. A cold, cruel smile that wasn't her own. She stumbled backward, her heart racing as the room seemed to spin around her. The shadows in the mirror moved, reaching out like tendrils trying to drag her in. The growl returned, louder now, resonating through the room. It wasn't coming from anywhere. It was coming from everywhere. Hannah could feel the walls closing in, the house tightening around her, as if it was going to swallow her whole. She had to break free. With all the strength she could muster, she reached out and grabbed the mirror, trying to pull it away from the wall, but it wouldn't budge. The room seemed to collapse inward, and as the reflection in the mirror reached out toward her, Hannah screamed, her voice swallowed by the darkness. The air was thick with tension, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Hannah could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness closing in on her. Every step she took echoed, a constant reminder that she was being hunted. Her thoughts were fractured, her mind slipping between moments of clarity and complete confusion. The growl had stopped, but something worse had taken its place, an unnerving silence. The house was no longer playing games. It was about to deliver the final blow. Hannah could feel her heart hammering in her chest, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Her body screamed for rest, but there was no time. She had to keep moving. The walls seemed to pulse around her, and she could swear she heard a faint whisper. Her name! Hannah. The voice was closer now, but there was no escaping it. No matter where she ran, the house was always there, waiting. As Hannah moved deeper into the house, she could feel the temperature drop. Her breath came in ragged gasps, visible in the cold air. She tried to make sense of what was happening, but it was all slipping away. The house was shifting, warping, and every corner felt like it was closing in. The darkness pressed against her from all sides, and she could feel her sanity slipping. She needed to stop. She needed to figure out what was happening before it consumed her completely. But when she looked up, the hallway ahead of her was gone. In its place was a vast, empty void, stretching far beyond the limits of the house. Her legs shook as she stepped forward, unsure if she was hallucinating or if the house itself was playing tricks on her. The floor beneath her feet shifted, sending Hannah stumbling forward. She barely caught herself, her hands scraping against the rough wood. Her heart raced, and she could feel the panic rising in her chest. The darkness around her was no longer just an absence of light. It was a living thing closing in on her. Every shadow seemed to reach for her, to pull her deeper into the void. She had to find a way out. But the house seemed to laugh at her attempts, shifting and changing with every step she took. It was like being trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. The whisper came again, this time louder, more insistent. You cannot escape. Hannah shuddered, her fingers trembling as she pressed them to her temple, trying to block out the voice. Hannah could feel the presence of the house closing in on her. It was everywhere now, in the walls, in the floorboards, in the air she breathed. Her vision was swimming, and the house seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The whispers were no longer just words, they were commands, spoken in a voice that echoed from all around her. Hannah, you belong to me. The voice rang in her ears, and Hannah felt her body go cold. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't fight it anymore. The house had won. There was no going back. The walls were closing in, and the floor beneath her feet was giving way. She closed her eyes, waiting for the final blow. But it never came. Instead, the ground beneath her feet disappeared completely, and she was falling into darkness. As Hannah fell, time seemed to slow. The darkness swallowed her whole, and she could feel the walls closing in, the house pulling her deeper. She could hear the growl again, louder than ever, as it vibrated through her entire body. It was over. She was trapped in this endless void, with no escape, no end. There was no light, no hope, just the cold, suffocating darkness that pressed against her from every side. Her mind was breaking, her body numb with fear. As the growl echoed louder, it suddenly stopped, replaced by silence. And then, a new voice. A voice she knew. Hannah. It wasn't the house anymore. It was something else. Something far worse. The silence in the house was overwhelming. Hannah stood motionless in the center of the room, the echoes of her own breaths the only sound in the dark. The house, once a living nightmare, now felt like a tomb. But something was different. She was free, or at least she thought she was. Her body ached from the terror, her mind still racing to catch up with what had happened. Was it over? Was she truly free from the darkness that had haunted her? She turned slowly, scanning the empty space around her. The walls were still, the shadows no longer moving, but a cold chill still lingered in the air, and in the back of her mind, she could still hear the faint growl that had tormented her for so long. It was a whisper, a memory. Had the house really let her go, or had it simply given her a brief reprieve before it came back for her? Hannah took a cautious step forward, her heart still pounding in her chest. The house felt emptier now, but the weight of her experiences lingered in every corner. She knew she couldn't stay here much longer, but where could she go? Every place she had known seemed to be touched by the darkness. She couldn't escape it. Her hand brushed against the wall as she moved through the space, her fingers lingering on the cold, rough surface. The memories of the growls, the whispers, the shadows, they were still fresh, like scars on her mind. But now, there was an eerie peace. The house wasn't pulling her in anymore. It had let her go. But at what cost? Hannah wasn't sure if she could ever truly be free, even if she escaped the walls. The house had changed her in ways she couldn't understand. As Hannah made her way toward the door, she paused, her hand on the handle. The silence was deafening, and the weight of the house seemed to press against her. Could she leave? Could she really escape everything that had happened here? The door was right in front of her, but something inside her hesitated. She was so close to freedom, yet there was a nagging fear deep inside her. She turned back one last time, her eyes sweeping the room as if expecting the shadows to come alive again. But nothing happened. The room was still. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was peace. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house had only allowed her to leave because it had already claimed something far worse. Hannah finally stepped through the door, the cool air of the outside world washing over her like a balm. For a brief moment, she thought she could breathe again, but the relief was short-lived. The world outside was quiet, still, and empty. She stood there on the threshold, uncertain of where to go next. The house behind her was silent, but the unease that had settled in her chest hadn't gone away. She looked back at the dark, looming structure one last time, half expecting it to pull her back in, to call her name again. But it didn't. It just stood there, empty and silent, for now. The darkness had left her, but she wasn't sure if it would stay gone. She could feel it still in her mind, in her soul. As Hannah walked away from the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still being watched. The growls and whispers may have stopped, but the terror was still with her, deep inside her. Every step she took was filled with dread. She could hear her footsteps echoing, but they were too loud, too sharp, as if something was following her. She looked over her shoulder one last time, half expecting the house to be there, looming in the distance. But it wasn't. Still, she couldn't forget the way the house had felt alive, and the darkness that had followed her. She couldn't forget how it had changed her. Hannah wasn't sure if she was free. Maybe she never would be.